Welcome to Real World, Real Talk with Dr. D.Z. Cofield. This show represents captivating conversations and insightful information to encourage and inspire you with all you need to become the best you can possibly be. And now, your host for Real World, Real Talk, Dr. D.Z. Cofield.
Welcome to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, DZ Cofield, and you're listening to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, your community station, KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial in the Houston metropolitan area, and KTSUradio.com everywhere in the world. I want to thank you for being with me on this day. Thank you for the privilege of your time. Let me say happy Juneteenth to everybody who is listening. And happy Father's Day to all of the fathers. Today is a unique day. This is actually the first time in history that Juneteenth is a national holiday, and it is falling on Father's Day. And so we're doing a combination show with a brother that I love and have such a tremendous amount of respect for. Always enjoy having him with us, and I'm looking forward to dialoguing with him about these two significant events and really how they merge, how they intersect with one another, and how we can be challenged to be the best that we can be as we move beyond this day. Now, just a couple of housekeeping matters. If you like to follow me during the week, you can follow me on Instagram at DZ Cofield. You can follow me on Twitter at DZ Cofield, and you can follow me on Facebook, and you guessed it, at DZ Cofield. Juneteenth has been a Southern holiday for many, created here in Galveston, June the 19th, when word was brought to slaves by Union troops that they were actually freed, and it has spread across the South. It was more of a regional holiday. One would identify the late Representative Al Edwards as one of the fathers of the Juneteenth movement here, as he moved to have Juneteenth recognized by the state of Texas. But last year, President Joe Biden, in a very, very quick way, signed legislation and made Juneteenth a national holiday. It happened so fast, it caught many of us off guard. But this year, I think everybody, especially having come out of the massive restraints of COVID, people are looking forward to celebrating Juneteenth all over this country. And then, of course, you've got Father's Day. And, fathers, we don't get a whole lot of love, not a whole lot of songs written about fathers, not a whole lot of poems written about fathers. As a matter of fact, I heard a report today that Father's Day is the 20th favorite holiday in our country, number 20. Halloween is in front of Father's Day. Arbor Day is in front of Father's Day. I think Flag Day may be in front of it as well. But we want to celebrate fathers today, and all of you who are serving as that father figure, we want to applaud you today. I'm happy to welcome the associate editor of the Defender News Network. He's a professor at the University of Houston, an associate minister at the Shrine of the Black Madonna, and he's somebody that I consider a friend and a thought partner, just a great brother. And let's welcome to Real World, Real Talk, Brother Oswald Walker. Brother Oswald, what's up, brother?
Man, I'm still laughing at the fact that Arbor Day,
right, man.
Flag Day is in front of Father's Day.
Dude, and there's some folk going, what is Arbor Day, right? The trees are getting more love than the fathers, man. Mm-hmm. Who was that? Bobby Bland sang that song, Ain't No Love in the City. Man, ain't no love for fathers, man. Ain't no love for fathers. But let's talk about first Juneteenth. I know the Defender Network just published an issue celebrating Juneteenth. What do you think is the significance of this national holiday, especially this year? Because last year we were still in COVID. We were still wrestling with COVID restrictions. And it just seemed like, man, President Biden out of nowhere. I'm not saying it happened out of nowhere, but it just felt like out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It took us years to get the King holiday. And so, then it was just like, oh, Juneteenth, national holiday. Yes. And it was like, whoa, wait a minute. How'd that happen?
Yeah.
And it snuck up on a lot of people. It was like, what, 3 days before Juneteenth?
It was 2 days before Juneteenth last year. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this year, it seems like there's just a renewed energy around it. I'm not sure if it's just because people are now coming out the house and seeing other people still alive, or what it is. What do you think it is?
Well, I think it's all of the above. And I think in terms of, President Biden signing it, that may have been like the repercussions of the summer of George Floyd, right? Trying to find things to assuage the righteous indignation of Black folk at the direction that law enforcement, criminal justice has continued to go forever. But I just yesterday had the honor of presenting to some social workers at the VA hospital about Juneteenth, and we ran down the history, the Gordon Granger and the General Order Number 3 and this, that, and the, all those things that we know. And I said it's critical that we know that history, but really the question is, what does Juneteenth mean to us right here and right now? And so what I shared with them was, I thought 3 things. One, Juneteenth is about our authority and our own agency, our ability to do, regardless of whether other people give us permission to or not. That's literally how Juneteenth was founded. We didn't wait for someone to give us permission to create this holiday. Reverend Jack Yates in 1872 and his crew pitched their pennies together to purchase Emancipation Park for the specific purpose of celebrating Juneteenth, this year being the 150th anniversary of that. They didn't wait for someone to give them the okay. They recognize their own authority and their own agency. So I think that's one thing we need to remember. The second is the importance of holidays. A lot of people don't realize that holidays were created really to celebrate the values important to a group of people. And when you look at the calendar of the year, you don't see a whole lot of Black holidays, meaning there are no opportunities for us to annually celebrate those things critically important to us. What are the values important to us? Education, freedom, whatever they may be. That's one of the reasons why Dr. Maulana Karenga founded Kwanzaa, because he was trying to celebrate specific values he thought would lift us up as a people. And so Juneteenth definitely offers that. And then the third thing is emancipation, freedom. Like, what does emancipation look like? What does freedom look like? And what does that work look like right now? Yes, let's celebrate the history, but what emancipation work, what freedom work are we being called to right now?
So as you were speaking to them and as you were recapping the history of Juneteenth, let's talk to our listening audience. What are some of the key things that you think we need to do to personalize and apply the principles into our lives? Just one thing, and I agree with you, it's important for us to know the history.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times we fail to understand that we not only should learn our history, we have to live our history, and we have to live in a way recognizing that we're going to make history, that we are somebody's history in the future. And they're going to look back and say, okay, hey, man, they created this national holiday in 2021. And man, what did we end up doing with this? Is this just another day to go shopping, and buy, appliances? I mean, what is this? Because we know the 4th of July has been co-opted in so many ways, like many holidays. What are you thinking that we need to do as people of color to really own this holiday for those who have been celebrating it for years with the red soda water and the watermelon and the ribs and the barbecue, but also for those who come from other parts of the country? For example, I'm from the East Coast. Man, we didn't talk about Juneteenth. I mean, we talked a little bit about Emancipation Day, Emancipation Proclamation and the like, but nobody ever talked about Juneteenth in New York. I mean, and so now here it is, a national holiday. So we see a whole group of people and segments of the country who are being educated as to
Mhm.
what Juneteenth is and being reminded of our history. How do you see us being able to adopt principles, re-adopt principles, and make shifts and changes to make this more meaningful so that it actually produces something in our lives?
I love that question, and I hope everyone is asking that question of themselves this particular Juneteenth. And when you ask me that, I think about the words Bob Marley sung in the song "Redemption Song," where he was really quoting Marcus Mosiah Garvey, where he says, "Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds." And so I look at the work of emancipation in really four different ways. One, emancipating the mind, doing the reading, learning about our history, heritage, and culture, taking classes, all kinds of colleges offering free classes. Houston used to have leisure learning. I'm not sure if they still do or not, but if that's available, we've got to commit ourselves to being lifelong learners. And then emancipating the mind, learning our history is not just about reading about what folk did in the history books. We have folk in our own families that made a way out of no way. Let's learn about our family, big mama, auntie, uncle, brother, cousin, this, who did heroic things that, didn't get on the news and didn't get talked about in the history books, but they made a way for you and me. And so emancipate the mind is number one. Emancipate the body, emancipate the spirit, emancipate community. The body, exercise, walking, gardening, respecting our temple, emancipating our spirit through diet and exercise, meditation, positive affirmations. Like I was sharing with the group yesterday at the VA hospital. Shout out to them and Carmichael Khan. Researchers have found out that Black children, on average, hear 200 negative messages a day. And for every one negative message a human being hears, they have to hear 5 positive messages just to stay balanced. And we know our children are not hearing 1,000 positive messages a day. And so, as it's been said by folk way smarter than me, if you're not hearing positive things from other folk, you've got to have the sense to tell it to yourself. And so positive affirmations, which have been shown scientifically to lift people's spirits and, put them on positive paths. That's one way to emancipate the spirit. And then finally, emancipate community. What are the big issues that we're facing as families, as neighborhoods, as a people, as a nation, be it voter suppression, the call for reparations, healthcare access, gender wage inequality, racial wage inequality, sex trafficking, the attack on democracy. What is spirit calling you to do? Because, you can't do all things, but, you can do something. And that's one way to help emancipate community. So I'm not going to say do one or the other. Find what spirit is leading you to do.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield, and you're listening to your member-supported public radio station, KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial. And I want to thank those of you who are watching the Real World, Real Talk podcast network. So I love that idea of emancipation and taking responsibility for your own emancipation. I had an incident this past week, and we'll talk about Father's Day, but I see the correlation. So we did a Daddy and Donuts Day. And I tell you what's interesting, at our international preschool, Daddy and Donuts Day is actually more popular than Mommy and Muffins Day leading up to Mother's Day. We have more dads show up, and man, I'm so encouraged by these young brothers, and not just the fathers coming, but the grandfathers and the uncles. Some of our children had 2 or 3 men there that were part of their family, man, and it was so exciting. And one of the things that I told them, I, like many people, did not understand coming up the importance of positive reinforcement and the creating of those positive neural pathways in the brains of our children. And, scientists say that when you speak that positivity to a child, it not only establishes those positive neural networks, but it begins to look for and become more receptive to the positive and more rejecting of the negative.
Wow.
Conversely, when they hear negativity and you don't think they're listening to your cussing, your fussing, your screaming, or you say, well, they're just 1 year old, they're just 2 years old. But that creates almost micro traumas in the brain and creates those negative pathways that are not seen as positive, but those negative neural networks are actually looking for affirmation in the form of negativity. And so when you have people who are growing up and it's almost like they look for the negative, they try to create the negative, that they can't find anything negative,
Right.
Scientists are suggesting that goes back to childhood. And so I was encouraging the fathers, man, your positive presence here, man, these dads were coloring with their children and they're affirming their children. And I just want to encourage those brothers in doing that. And I tell people all the time, I have, 3 biological children, 2 bonus children. But I will tell you this, my son, my youngest son, who has a little boy, is in my mind a much better dad than I was. And I don't know if he's a much better dad because he learned from me what to do right, or he learned from me what not to do. Maybe a combination, right? But I'm so proud of him, and I see my bonus son. He's got 3 girls, and he's like the best girl dad. I mean, he just does a tremendous job with his girls, and it almost makes me envious. Like I wish I could go back and redo that parenting thing again. But how important that affirmation is to claim your own emancipation and
Definitely.
the mind, the body, the spirit, the community. And I love your idea about the importance of holidays, to remember. One of the communities that I have so much respect for is the Jewish community, in part because they don't require other people to affirm who they are and affirm their history. They're like, no, this is our history. We're going to claim this and we're going to do what we do. We're not going to listen to you tell us the Holocaust was a figment of our imagination. It wasn't really that bad. It wasn't that traumatic. They're like, man, bunk on that, man. We are going to claim our own history. We're going to tell our own story. And we're not even requiring you to tell it in the schools. This is a whole nother point. But when we talk about even the teaching of African-American history, I don't want somebody who doesn't have a passion for my history teaching me about my history. That's what we've had for the last 400 years, right? We need to teach our own history and learn our own history. And if we can't teach it in the classroom, man, teach it at home, because that is really the training ground. So let's talk about this combination, man, of well, first, Juneteenth, celebrating this weekend, and the 19th, the airing of this show today is Juneteenth, proper June 19th. Man, Emancipation Park, 150 years old. Interestingly enough, our church was organized in 1872, so we're celebrating our 150th anniversary this year.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you, man. We've had 6 pastors, in 150 years, man. So,
6 pastors in 150 years.
Yeah.
Man, I know some churches that had 6 pastors in 6 months. Lord have mercy.
You're right, man. You are right. So I'm super excited about that. Talk about, as a resident of this city and an associate editor for the Defender Network and a teacher of African American studies, give us your perspective on everything surrounding Emancipation Park over the last several years. The $33.6 million that was put into actually renovating this park that was purchased for and dedicated to free slaves, the changing of the name of Dowling Street, to Emancipation Avenue, and people need to know it was Emancipation Park before there was Emancipation Avenue that it was on, and this celebration bringing in classic artists, but also celebrating local artists as well, and food vendors and the like. Talk about that shift that's taken place, and the importance of that shift.
So I think, well, from what I see is it's Black people once again asserting agency, right? Asserting our own authority and recognizing that, there's a group that I'm sure you're familiar with, the Emancipation Economic Development Council, who were born literally to push back against the efforts to gentrify Third Ward. And so they've done a Herculean task of bringing businesses and faith communities and a little bit of everybody together to find different ways to reinvigorate life into this particular Third Ward community, but also to serve as an example for other communities. And so they've done an incredible job, I believe. The investment into Emancipation Park, beautiful. We need more, but what's even more important than those dollars is our level of ownership. And that's what I've seen over the past few years, is more and more Black people taking pride and ownership in that space and using it as such. That space has been used, and this isn't scientific, but just from my viewing and my participation, it seems like that space has been used more in the past 2 or 3 years than in past decades. And that's not to say that Black folk, that we hadn't used that park, but I mean, I see all kinds of events taking place in Emancipation Park, in the gym, in the community center. Every time I go there, I see young folk either on the baseball field, which is beautiful to me because I'm a baseball fan, playing basketball, tennis, and it's just a gathering point, right? And oftentimes when our elected officials or others need to get a message out to the masses, they hold their press conferences right there because it's such a central part of the community. And I think in terms of symbolism, I'm so glad that you mentioned the changing of the name of Dowling Street, right? Because Dowling was a Confederate general who was celebrated, for his work trying to keep us enslaved. And I don't have this as fact, but I know that Emancipation Park, one street is Dowling, another street was Tuam, which I believe was the city where Dowling came from. He was a European immigrant. And so it was as if they were like, okay, you all have this land, but we are going to surround you with these symbols of white supremacy, just as almost like a slap in the face. So the changing of that name, I think, was critically important, if for no other reason, just for the symbolism. But it's this whole reawakening of our own agency and our own ability to do our own authority, to use time, to use days, to use spaces for our own benefit. And that can't do anything but good for us.
Yeah, I love what you mentioned earlier in terms of telling our own story, telling our own history, and recognizing the history that's in our midst. Mm-hmm. When I think about this, I recognize that in my grandfather, who was born in 1898, I had a man who shook the hands of and lived with people who were enslaved, which means we really didn't come that far. Mm-mm. If I think about my grandfather and my love for him and his unconditional love for me, and he was born in 1898, then it's like, whoa, so this man lived through Jim Crow. He lived through the KKK. He's from South Carolina, right? And so, how do we stop and sit down, man, and listen to these stories? One of the great tragedies I have found in many funerals and homegoing services for people is that many of the people lived beyond the time of their remembered greatness. And you start hearing stories about people and you're like, he did what? Man, she had what? She was the first person to do what? And they're just sitting there in your midst. And as families, I really want to encourage families on this Juneteenth holiday to recognize the living history that's in your midst. To ask those family members, ask those older members what it was like. Many people, and Oswald, we're old enough to remember traveling prior to 9/11 and traveling after 9/11. Most millennials and all of Gen Z, man, they were born after that. They have no idea, when we talk about that, they have no idea what the world was like to have to stop if you wanted to make a phone call and make sure you had a dime, a nickel, or a quarter, and call on the payphone. I was listening to one of the old songs by the group called Sky, Call Me. And she said, here's my number and a dime. Call me anytime. Right. And I'm like, woo, that was a long time ago, man. And so, we don't realize that we have lived through history. And I certainly want to encourage somebody as you think about the holiday and you think about the celebration of Juneteenth, that you make sure you think about those family members and let them tell you the story. And listen, let's shift just for a moment over to Father's Day.
All right.
I said earlier, that the report was that there are 20 holidays that are more celebrated than Father's Day. And you pointed out in an article in the Defender, man, there's all kinds of songs, for mothers, celebrating mothers. I was performing a wedding and the son and his mother had a dance, and the daughter, the bride, and her father had a dance. So when the son had his dance with his mother, the groom, they danced to the Tupac song, Loving Mama, right? And it was interesting because here's the son who is in his 30s. He's spitting the words, word for word, and his mama saying the words word for word. Her husband is saying the words word for word. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing, like how this song has crossed generations. Listen, man, thank God for Dance With My Father Again, because if we didn't get that one from Luther, we wouldn't have a positive song, man. I don't know of any other than Papa Was a Rolling Stone. That's about as good as it got, man. Let's talk about some things. And you know what I would like to do? I think I want to have some fun. So let's flip flop. You give me one of the positive things that you want to share with fathers to encourage fathers. I'll do one, and then you do one, and then I'll do one. And let's see what we can come up with to encourage dads out there, because I know it's tough. A lot of fathers, especially because they did not maintain good relationships with the mother of their children. Many of them are struggling to have a good relationship with their children. There are some children who have taken up the battle that their mothers had, and, they're not talking to their dads. And I really want to help somebody this year find some freedom. We talk about emancipation, and we're talking about Juneteenth. It would be a beautiful thing if we could help somebody find some freedom out of the anger, the bitterness, the resentment that's keeping them from having a positive relationship with their father.
Yeah. Number one, I would say let's free ourselves from this idea that Black fathers, there are no good Black fathers, that they don't exist. That wasn't my experience growing up. But also in 2015, the CDC, who has not historically been a friend to Black people, they came out with a report that showed statistically that Black fathers are there for their children just as much, if not more so, than white fathers, Latino, and Asian fathers. Yet, we hang on to this this idea. I mean, we talk about it more than other folk, that black fathers aren't present. But according to the statistics, black fathers are there and they are showing up, whether they have a good relationship with their children's, mother or not. Statistically, black fathers are there. And I think that's the story. That's the story that we need to free so that, we can change that narrative because we're there. And I'm looking at a father that's present.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, I want to encourage fathers to know that perfection as a parent is unattainable. And it's okay. Just do the best job you can. Because the truth of the matter is, when we were handed our children leaving the hospital or the midwifery, none of them came with manuals. And if you thought you figured out how to raise a child after your first child, if you had a second child, you quickly learned that you had to throw away that first manual because that second child has their own ideas, their own temperament, their own personality. Even though they grow up in the same house, put their feet under the same table and eat out of the same pot, man, that children are so different, so distinctive. And I want to encourage a father today, just do the best that you can, and I've learned, if nothing else, just learn how to love your children no matter what. I've had people say to me, well, how would you respond as a Christian if your child said this or your son did this or whatever? Love them, because that's my job, just to love them, just to be there to support them and encourage them and protect them and do all that I can to be there for them. So I want to encourage a father out there. Don't worry about perfection. Just be persistent in the giving of love.
Yeah. And I want to encourage fathers to take their children with them. I say that because my father, that's how I was introduced to Juneteenth. My family, we're not originally from Texas either. We moved here when I was, I think, in fourth grade. The first time I ever heard the word Juneteenth was from my father. And he took me and my little sister to a Juneteenth parade. So, where just take your children with you. You never know what words of wisdom or what little thing you say will just stick with them for life. Juneteenth has always had a special meaning for me. And I can't think about Juneteenth without thinking about my father. So, make sure, brothers, that you continue to hang out with your children. Take them with you.
Yeah, no, that's great. I want to say to the children out there, don't require perfection of your parents.
That's a good one.
And don't require perfection of your father.
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is, man, we're all a work in progress. And so many times, I think children can have this Pollyanna view of parents, and, parents act like they know everything. They're just really trying to let you know they know more than you do, but they don't know everything. Mm-hmm. And, all we could do is do the best we could, with what we had. And even in terms of relationships, I always tell children, the greatest gift you can give on Father's Day is to forgive your father, and it's not just a gift that you can give to him. It's a gift that you give to yourself, especially when you are fighting a battle with your father that's really not your fight. It's really your mama's fight. And a lot of people don't want to hear that, but it's really your mama's fight, and mothers, man, will pull children into that fight and pull children into that battle. And I can remember when my first wife and I went through our separation and then ultimately our divorce. Nothing that I would ever recommend anybody to go through. If you can avoid it, man, you want to avoid it at all costs. But I had to have a conversation with my children, and I had to remind them that I will always be their father. That's not going to change. And the truth of the matter is, she was my woman before she was your mama. And there's some things that you don't understand because it's grown folk conversation. So even my daughter, who is my oldest, would come to me and felt empowered by her mother to ask me some questions. And I had to remind her, I said, now, baby girl, listen, as long as you are Black and you are my child, that conversation you and I are not going to have, because that's grown folk talk. And that's between my woman and me, not between your mama and your daddy. That's not your place. You need to stay out of that. And like the old folks say, if you just keep on living long enough,
you'll learn.
Understand.
Yes, you
You'll
will.
understand. So that gift, man, just don't require perfection. Just embrace that gift of forgiving. I think is powerful.
Yeah, and I would say to the fathers out there, your presence and your word carries way more weight than you realize. My father told me one day, a friend of mine was trying to connect with me, and I was like, I don't have time. And my dad was like, you can't play cheap anyone's friendship or anyone's relationship, because you never know, how important that person may end up being to you in your life. And that has just stayed with me forever. And the other thing is just his presence. Like when I was playing Little League baseball, that's when my mother first contracted breast cancer. Yet he was always there. I mean, he was there for us, me and my sister, and he was there for my mother as well. And those examples have carried so much weight in my life. And I tried to do that for, my wife and my children. And as you say, and I'm glad you said it, I am and we are not perfect, but I remember that example, and I try to allow that to kind of guide my steps, order my steps when I'm moving forward.
Yeah. I'd like to encourage dads to know that money and possessions is never an equal or worthy substitute of time.
Man, you're preaching now.
Yeah, people, man, your children, they may remember a trip, they may remember getting something, but they will never forget time. I remember someone said to me, a man will come to the end of his life and regret many things, but he will never regret the time that he spent with his children. And time is irreplaceable, man. You just don't know. And I grew up in a home where my father was a hard worker and he provided, but he wasn't always there. I can remember in high school, man, I was a really good high school player. I was recruited to play in college. I think my dad maybe made one game, and he was retired, and I can just remember looking over, man, I wanted to see, man, was my dad going to come to the game? Was my dad going to come to the game? And I don't think he knew, and maybe this is a word to a father out there. I don't think my father knew how important his presence was because he didn't get it from his father. Sometimes when we don't get things, we recognize the importance of it and we make sure we give it. But sometimes when we don't get things, we're oblivious to it and we don't even see it. And I can remember coming up early part, man, of my life, I'm hustling, man. I'm working. My first wife was stay-at-home mom. And so, I'm feeling this pressure, man. If I don't work, if I don't go get it, they're not going to eat, And I literally can remember sending my kids on vacation with their mother, and I'm home working, but I wanted them to experience Disney World. I wanted them to experience, Six Flags. But man, I'm like, man, I got to work because somebody got to pay for it. And man, I didn't have anybody to tell me, hey man, that's not worth the price. And rather than sending them to Six Flags, you'd be better off spending a day with them and squirting each other with a water hose. That would create a better bond and a better memory than sending them someplace. Time is just the most valuable thing you can give to your children.
Yeah. And I would share that for the fathers, don't allow what you didn't experience to then penalize your children. And I say that because one of my best friends went to high school, college together. His father wasn't there, but he made a vow to himself that everything he missed out on with his father, he was going to make sure that he was there to give it to his children. And he's one of those fathers that I'm blessed to know and respect. And so it just reminds me that generational trauma, generational curses, whatever, don't have to continue. We have the power to make a decision to change course. And he's done so in a really, really powerful way.
Yeah. Well, I certainly want to tell dads out there that ultimately finding your healing for your past hurts and trauma can provide generational healing for those who are coming behind you.
Yeah.
And, you know, my father was in ministry, but my father was abusive, verbally, physically. With my mother, he and I had a very fractured relationship when I stood against him. And one of the things that allowed me to forgive him was in looking at the history of our family. And I saw the abuse and the trauma that he experienced, the abuse and the trauma that his mother experienced, the abuse and the trauma that his grandfather experienced. And so, you know, when people talk about generational curses, I always tell people generational curses are not those things that are pronounced on us. They are the things that are perpetuated by us. It's that unresolved hurt that we just take into the next generation. And that's just the way it is, or that's just the way I am, or, well, you don't know what I went through. But listen, if you're carrying that pain with you in your present, guess what? You're making me pay the price for what you went through. And somewhere along the line, we've got to say enough is enough. And I want to encourage dads. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how young you are. Man, take the opportunity to find that self-healing, to find that place where you can deal with your issues. You know, Oswald, one of the most powerful things I saw was an episode of Ayanna Van Zant when she met with Terrell Owens. And, you know, Terrell Owens, arguably one of the most talented football players, period, in the history of the NFL, and was just an unbelievable specimen. I mean, just could run, could jump, could do all of those things. But that dude walked around with a hole in him. And what we discovered was, and what he discovered after he retired, all of the things that you heard said about him as a football player, and distraction to the team, and destructive and poisonous and all those things, and he wants attention to himself. What they discovered was that his mother was a teenage mother who had a relationship with a married man who lived right across the street from the family. And the father never owned Terrell. Terrell didn't know the man was his father until he started liking a young lady who was his cousin. And they had to tell him. And he never, his entire life, his father never owned him. And I'm talking about even after he found out as a teenager, in college, in the professional ranks. His father never said, man, I'm sorry, I'm proud of you. And here's a grown man in his 50s, man, weeping like a baby in the room with his father and mother. And his father never apologized to her for not being there. And it was like, wow, this dude, even though he's 50, he's gone back to 5 years old.
Yeah.
You know, and it was just the explanation for everything that this dude has done throughout his lifetime that did not allow him to be the best version of himself that he could be. And I want to encourage fathers, man, to really find that healing for yourself.
Yeah. And your words reminded me of another really important thing for us fathers is to be that father, not only for our own children, but for others. And let's celebrate those bonus fathers, so to speak. So in my growing up, I mean, just about all my best friends, their fathers were there, and they were fathers to me. Hanging out with the Garners, you know, Ron Garner and crew right down the street from me. Mr. Garner was a father to me. One of my other best friends, Daniel Akalu, we went to middle school, high school, and college together. His father was a father to me. Mike Mead, we went from middle school, high school, you know, still friends to this day. His father to me. And some of them were coaches, some of them were other, but you never know how you are impacting others by your presence and just by you accepting, you know, the friends of your children. And I'm thinking about what you said about Terrell Owens. I just hate that he didn't have those others in his life to, you know, kind of pick up where his biological father, you know, dropped the ball.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I certainly want to piggyback on that. You know, many of us are fathers by chance, but the most powerful expression of love are those who are fathers by choice. I had a friend of mine say to me about his stepfather. He said, man, you know what I realized a stepfather is? He said, it's a father who steps in when you need him in your life. And I love that definition of a stepfather. I want to say fathers, you know, recognize the important role you have in shaping your children's image of themselves. And I use this analogy, you know, if you go into a fun house at an amusement park or carnival, they have space where you can look in a mirror or a polished piece of metal and you will see yourself differently. Depending on what you're looking in, right? So you may look in one mirror and you have a really big head and a little tiny body. And then you move to the next mirror and it's reverse. You got a little head and a big body. And then you go to the next mirror and you got a tiny waist, but you're big at the top and the bottom, right? And what I realized was you don't change. Your perception of yourself changes depending on the mirror you're looking in. And I want to encourage fathers to know that you're always providing the mirror that your children see themselves in. That your sons, for them, you are the first hero in their life. And they're going to look at you as a dad, and that's who they want to be when they grow up. And your daughters, you are the first love of their life. When they judge a man, when they look at a man and how they should interact with a man, it's going to be set by how you interact with them. And you create that mirror. And so again, that positive, affirming love that encourages and inspires is so powerful because it sets a tone, not just in childhood, but for the rest of their lives. Because no matter what image is put in front of them, no matter what mirror is in front of them, they're always going to revert to the mirror that their daddy held in front of them.
Wow, that's powerful. That's powerful. And I'm thinking of our attitudes, just our attitudes, our habits as fathers, and how you know, how you work, or your commitment to keeping your word, or your ability to even be vulnerable and admit mistakes and imperfection. I'm sorry, son, child, I got that one wrong. Those go a long way. And, you know, oftentimes, like you said, as a parent, you know, we want to, you know, portray ourselves as the authority, as the knowledgeable and all that. But sometimes it's even more powerful to show, like you said, we really don't know it all, and that we can learn. In fact, there's so much. I heard one person say that, I'm sure I've taught my children a lot, but man, they've probably taught me more than I've ever taught them, about myself, about how to love, about how to open up, about how to be vulnerable. And so, just our attitudes and, how we treat people, how we, commitment to lifelong learning, commitment to being respectful, those things, even without your words, go such a long way and are so impressionable on lives. My father, I'm blessed to still have him. He's 84 years old, and he is still reading. He's always listening to this and calling me up and talking about this political issue and that. What's the latest book you're reading? He is committed to lifelong learning, and that is. I see that in myself. I see that in my children, and so I'm appreciative of him for setting that example.
Yeah, man, that's so cool. That's got to be just a cool moment to be able to sit down with your pops and chop it up like that and talk about things, whether you agree or disagree.
And we do both.
Yeah, but that's awesome. I want to encourage every father out there to look for moments to be a father to anyone who may need a fathering moment. And what I mean by that is, sometimes when we think of fathers, we think we got to be way older, when we can be kind of fathering and encouraging to each other. I had a brother at the church, and I saw him out with his family. And I've known him for years, knew him before his daughter and his son were born. And I saw him out, and he and the mother of his children lived together for a while. I never said anything about it. That certainly, was his business. But just loved him, man, just encouraged the brother. And he ended up getting married, and man, just this beautiful family. And I ran into him in a sporting goods store, and I saw him, and we spoke and hugged, and great to see him, great to see the wife, great to see the kids. And he walked away, and God just led me to affirm him. And I called him and I said, "Hey, man," I said, "I know your dad has passed away, but I want you to know, man, I really believe your dad is proud of the man you've become. And for whatever it's worth, I'm proud of the man you've become." And man, it was almost like water on a dying plant, man. That brother that affirmation that I gave to him. And this, a lot of times, man, the most powerful affirmation we can get is from other brothers who know what the struggle is like and know what we're dealing with. Love the affirmation from our wives, from our children. But when a real man affirms you in your manhood and the things that you've done that we may not historically have necessarily celebrated, and just celebrating this brother, man, faithful to his wife, he's got a beautiful family now, professional career. We need to encourage each other. So I want to encourage the fathers out here to don't miss the moments to father other fathers and encourage them like you would want your father to encourage you. You hear it. Your dad is still around, still in his right mind, but there are many of us who wonder. I can remember even saying to my mom, not so much with my dad, but like with my grandfather, I would say to her, sometimes, man, I wonder if he would be proud of me, because when he passed in 1984, I was 22, 23 years old. You know what I mean? So I was just kind of getting started, but I wonder, man, if he was still around, if he would be proud of me. So we can really find that place where we can affirm one another.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, I would say, let's not be so committed to our mask of manhood that we're not willing to be vulnerable with other fathers and to go to, the fathers that we know for advice, for whatever. It's amazing some of those conversations that you have when you're willing to be vulnerable. Say, hey, man, I don't know what to do here, or I did this, and man, oh my gosh, how is that going in your life with your children? Those conversations can be, like you said, and I love the phrase you use, like water on a dying plant. Not just for you to receive that advice from others, but for those given that advice, right? Because it places them in that position that you're talking about, to be there to offer a fathering moment to someone else.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback as we get ready to close on that. When you see a young brother and you see somebody who may need their coattail pulled, man, don't criticize them. Don't talk about them. Reach over to them, pull them to the side and say, hey, man, let me just throw this at you. Let me just give you some knowledge. If there's anything I can do to help you, because if people don't know, they don't know, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we want people to ask us for help, but they don't even know they need the help, And so I've just learned, man, when I go out sometimes, I'll pick up the dinner of a family when I see a brother there with his wife or his girl and his kids, and just tell them, hey, man, just want to encourage you, man, as a brother, just, man, that you're doing your thing, and that somebody sees that, man, and I want to applaud that today. I just want to sow a little encouragement into you, those kinds of things, with my son-in-laws, I'll, call them, just send them a text, them, hey, man, I'm praying for you. I'm here. I already know something's going on, but I just want you to know, man, you don't have to be ashamed. You can come to me because I'm here and I want to encourage you. Man, Oswald, thank you so much, man, for today. This has been fun, man. I appreciate it.
It has. Thank you. Thank you, brother.
To celebrate Juneteenth and Father's Day on June the 19th this year. I think this is a special, special day, and we're going to see if we can do our part to get us in terms of Father's Day, at least above Arbor Day.
Come on, man. At least that, if nothing else.
Right. Get us a butt of trees. Get us a butt of trees. Yep. I appreciate you, brother.
Appreciate you too, man.
The late Vernon John said, if you see a good fight, get in it. I always add, if you don't see a good fight, start one. This year, we got two great fights. Juneteenth, the fight for freedom. And as Brother Oswald Walker pointed out, the ability to claim our own authority, to recognize the importance of this holiday and to celebrate freedom. And when we celebrate freedom, we're not talking about chains off of our wrists, but celebrating freedom and working to get the chains off of our minds. What a great, great opportunity. And then to celebrate fatherhood, which is a great, great honor that most of us just stumble into, and we don't typically appreciate it until our children are grown. And by the time we start appreciating it, hopefully God's blessed us with some grandchildren. I want to encourage you to have a great, great Juneteenth celebration. All right. I got to get out of here. I'm Dr. D.Z. Cofield for Real World, Real Talk, signing off. You're listening to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, KTSU.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Real World, Real Talk. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified of new episodes every week. Follow us via social media using the @RWRTDZ username on all platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. To submit any comments, questions, sponsor opportunities, or future show suggestions, visit us online at rwrtdz.com or via email at info@rwrtdz.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you've been inspired to be the change you want to see in the world today. Until next time, be real, keep it real, and stay real.